Okay, and Senator Niall O'Donnell.
Carla. Right, okay. Where do you start? I tell you who I feel sorry for in this instance, Senator Martin Conway, because despite being dirty Joed, the Fine Gael team voted to allow that drivel we just heard, and then ran away and left poor Martin and the rest of us to sit here and endure it. I must say, Carla, it's not as disrespectful as what we heard in the first contribution, I have to say.
It's disingenuous of an argument that you mightn't agree with, but you don't have to be disingenuous about it. Get on with your own.
That's certainly not a point of order.
Get on with your own.
Yeah, well, that's certainly not. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll make this point. Carla, through you, and I note I'm being asked to speak through the chair while others aren't, and I'll afford you that courtesy.
Argue the argument.
I'll afford you that courtesy, Carla, while I'm being shouted at from a number of
Senator
positions.
O'Donnell, without interruption. Thank you.
Carla, it takes a lot for me to be flabbergasted, I have to say, but as I mentioned, and indeed as other colleagues have alluded to, some of what we heard at the first contribution really did do just that, if not go beyond it. And it was supreme, I thought, in its not just its ignorance of a lot of the issues pertinent to this question, but indeed in its very nuanced divergence around many of the issues relating to this legislation as well. And while accepting fully and admitting fully, Minister, I don't have the wily legal or legislative or indeed oratory skills of Senator McDowell. I only wish I could defer to some of the groups in the public gallery to come in here to speak on my behalf, but more importantly to speak on behalf of the people who we are trying to protect and trying to support and trying to empower as a result of this legislation, because I refer back to my initial contribution. For me and for my party, the fundamental core of this legislation and this issue is about human rights. It's about the protection of people and the safety of people. So it should come as no surprise to anyone. It certainly doesn't come as any surprise to me that Senator McDowell in his contribution would run against the grain of progressive thinking in this state. And, you know, much like Senator Clifford Lee, I took issue with some of the specific nuances. The 18-year-old from Kerry, I don't know what he has against County Kerry people, but also this almost idyllic scenario, and maybe it's telling of an underlying argument, I'm not so sure. There was these numerous and continuous references to, you know, the lonely woman availing of a gigolo in a hotel somewhere. And there was a careful dance and a careful swerve. And in fact, we were told, actually, that he wouldn't take lectures about the exploitation of women because he knew it all and had been told it all. I think if you know that, and you've been told that, and are aware of the awfulness that exists in that scenario, how you could come in and then argue against this legislation defies logic. It's beyond my realm of concept and my realm of understanding, to be quite honest, because we're talking here about an industry that is equivalent to, if not worth more, than Coca-Cola, than McDonald's. And that is happening on the streets of this city. It's happening on the streets of Belfast, my own city. It's happening in the rural laneways and highways and byways all over both jurisdictions on this island. And I think if we can do anything that empowers people to actively stop that, to protect the people who are being trafficked into both states, who are being violently raped, abused, exploited, mistreated, then I think we have an obligation to do that. And by no means, I had words prepared, and by no means I didn't want to turn this into, I suppose, an emotive, or an overtly emotive, because it has to be an emotive debate, but an overtly emotive debate that focused simply on cliches, because that's the reason I said at the start of this contribution earlier on this evening that I wanted to see this legislation come into being. Because there are people there who I have no doubt in my mind, and I appreciate there are people who have different opinions, and that's fair enough. They view that this won't assist people, but my view is that it will save lives, that it will protect women in the majority, because the reality is, despite the pictures painted earlier, it is women who, by and large, are the victims of sexual exploitation and prostitution, not just in this state, but right around Europe and around the world as well. I found it immeasurably strange that we had another imaginary story, and that's not to play the situations that do exist down, but we had this other scenario where we had the young girl who was at university who then decided to go into prostitution so that she could then help pay for her education. I mean, if that is not, for me, the core nature of exploiting someone's disadvantage, someone's economic poverty, to then force them to have to go, as if someone is going to say, well, do you know what, I'll just go and prostitute. And that's okay, because maybe the young lad from Kerry, or maybe the lonely husband whose wife is away on business, wants to avail of her services. I'm sure and certain that regardless, by no means should we be criminalising that girl. It should be the person who is exploiting that girl's economic disadvantage and the situation that she finds herself in who should be held responsible. And that is what is at the core of this legislation. This is about proportioning responsibility. And I think, without simplifying it, I think to me that's fair enough. That is absolutely fair enough. I want to touch on a couple of more issues, Catherlock, and then I'll finish. Senator McDowell and indeed others referred rightly to the law in the North, and it is, of course, in its infancy. It's 18 months since coming in to being. And while there have been no prosecutions, I do understand there are a number of cases going through the system at present. But I tell you what runs in parallel with that law, which I read about now much more frequently, thank God, in the North, is women being rescued. Is the vast bulk again of prostitution that's happening on the streets of my city and other places across the North, is women who have been trafficked, who have been abused, and who have been subject to some of the most horrific mistreatment that we could, I don't even know that we could imagine it half the time. So while by no means that law is perfect, it has made a significant change, and I hope and I am confident, and I will do everything in my power and in my being to ensure that it does actively deliver for those in need. I want to, Minister, just in relation, because I said I had some notes written down, but in the North, the departments in government were required to develop a strategy within 10 months of the legislation coming into being that would introduce a programme of assistance and support for those seeking to leave prostitution in recognition of the barriers faced by people who want to exit prostitution. And the same should apply in this jurisdiction also, Minister. So that is perhaps something that could be looked at and I think should be acutely followed in relation to this piece of legislation as it progresses, and hopefully it will progress beyond tonight. I could go on, but I'm conscious that there's other people who want to speak and make a contribution. Some of the senators referred to this almost, and Senator Clifford Lee referred to, rightly, the people who exploit prostitutes finding themselves in court and how that impacts and affects the rest of their lives. And Senator McDowell offered a scenario that we should all hang our heads in shame and we should all feel incredibly guilty that we've presumed to hinder and stop the professional aspirations of, I presume, an 18-year-old from Kerry in his scenario, or I don't know how much he views the lonely old housewife having career aspirations, but nevertheless, that's what he's told us to think of in this instance. I would suggest to members that when this legislation is going forward, it won't be those people who I will be thinking of, with the greatest respect to them. And I'm not a reactionary. I'm not a Daily Mail reader. I'm not someone who believes in actively criminalising and haranguing people who do certain things. But with this legislation, the minute and the hour that not the young lad from Kerry, but the people who are actively exploiting and raping and abusing and trafficking these women find themselves beyond, in front of a court, I most certainly will not be leaving this chamber with my head hanging. My head will be held very, very high on that day.
Thank you very much. Senator Ronan Mullen.